Welcome back, everyone. And I'm really excited about this next session, Humanising Energy, Meeting the Enablers of the Transition. This is, I think, a new chapter for the World Energy Council. They have partnered with the BBC StoryWorks Commercial Productions, and they've gone out and around each of the World Energy Council member committees in different parts of the world, and they are using this as an example of meeting new ways in which technology is being innovating across the energy system, new individuals that are participating in this, and we hope as a result of that it brings alive some of the key themes that sit around humanizing energy. So these are human-centric stories of creativity, collaboration and community. And this session is going to be moderated by Betty Sue Flowers, who is a writer, an editor and an international business consultant. So on that, I'd like to hand over to Betty Sue to take us through what I think is a very exciting development for the World Energy Council.
Welcome, everybody. We're really excited to have you here this afternoon talking about humanizing energy, meeting the enablers of the transition. And we're very lucky today to have these enablers here. We really want to talk about how you talk about the transition because it's very, very difficult. I've been thinking about narrative all my life. And one of the things I've concluded about the climate change narrative is that it's really hard to talk about. And that's because it's big, it's bad, it's ugly. And those three things don't fit into narratives. It's big, it's so big we can't get our arms around it. It's very difficult to talk about this. It's bad, and that doesn't inspire people. So many people give up because they feel it's hopeless. And it's ugly, and by ugly I mean, you know, when we tell stories, usually we have heroes, we have adventures, but the story of climate change moves very slowly and it moves in numbers. From a narrative point of view, numbers, that's ugly material to work with. So because climate change is big, it's bad, it's ugly, it's difficult to tell stories around it, but the BBC is doing something wonderful about this. And I want to introduce you to Mark Gavhure because he has been one of the series leads and has helped to produce this BBC project, which showcase the human stories behind the energy transition. Mark, why did the BBC undertake this project? What have you learned? Tell us something about this.
Thank you, Betty Sue. So firstly, I'd like to say on behalf of BBC StoryWorks, what an honour it is to be in the company of such esteemed panellists with whom we've had the great pleasure of working alongside these past 6 months. I'd also like to thank the World Energy Council for putting together such a pivotal event, and the Council have been instrumental in helping us to structure this series, Humanising Energy. And whilst I would love to name names, we'd ultimately be here all day and the other panelists wouldn't get a word in edgeways. So we'll leave that for the Q&A or perhaps even the reception. But when we talk about why humanising energy, I think it's important to ask the question, why now? You know, this series really couldn't be more timely. When we're embarking on a new project like this, we often conduct surveys with our audiences on bbc.com. That's one of the best ways to find out who they are and what they're actually interested in hearing about. And what we find is that content related to climate, sustainability, and the energy transition consistently enjoy some of the highest engagement among our viewers. And so we know audiences care about these issues. But whilst it seems as though policy, technology, and investment is arguably moving in the right direction, there still remains a disconnect. Citizens, everyday people, still remain that largest, yet in many cases, sadly, the least informed stakeholder. Audiences are seeking out solutions. They're looking for the tools they need to understand how the energy transition impacts them, and in some cases where they can play a part in it. And that's partially why we felt it was the right time to connect audiences with this accelerating transition. Now, in terms of how we've done this, it's by taking some of those harder to understand technological innovations and applications, covering the breadth of the energy mix right the way across the globe. And we've turned them into compelling, solutions-led, human-focused stories. We know that people are hardwired for human stories, which is, I think, what makes Humanising Energy such a powerful series. Now, in terms of like some of the lessons that I've learned, I've had the privilege of working with some of those who are driving this energy transition, the future energy leaders, and those represented on the panel today. Now, I've seen the passion and enthusiasm with which they approach their work, technologies that border the realms of science fiction, and really an immensely diverse group of people on the ground addressing local challenges to meet their energy needs right the way across the globe. In all this, I've learned that the challenge we face, the challenge we all face is very real, but that there is hope still. And I think that lesson is best conveyed in the films themselves, many of which are released today. And I would encourage the audience afterwards to watch and engage. And I would lastly stress that this is an ongoing work. So if you're watching this session and thinking, you've got an impactful story that you want to tell the world, do reach out to us or the council, and I'm sure we'd love to hear those stories. But look, I'm going to leave it to the experts and let the other panelists lead on this discussion. But again, thank you, Betty Sue, for putting this all together.
Thank you, Mark. I've seen a couple of these. They're just beautifully produced and really, really interesting to watch. And these are the stars that we're going to introduce you to. Vaitea Cowan, who is co-founder and head of communications of Enapter, is working on creating a scalable electrolyzer that can turn water into hydrogen. That to me is kind of the holy grail of energy, if you can actually get energy out of water. Vaitea, tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Betty Sue, and thank you, Mark, for this great introduction. So to tell you a bit more about what we are doing at Enapter, well, our mission is to drive down the cost of green hydrogen to replace fossil fuels and to make it an affordable alternative fuel for everyone. So as you mentioned, we are manufacturing a product which is called an electrolyzer. And what it's doing is that it's not only transforming water into hydrogen, but it's actually using green electricity from solar or wind and transforming this green electricity into an emission-free gas, which is green hydrogen. So why do we even talk about green hydrogen in the first place? It's because when we look at today's energy consumption, well, 20% of it is met by electricity. And this is where solar and wind electricity are doing a great job at driving down the cost of renewables and also decarbonizing the sector which relies on electricity. However, then what about the remaining 80%, right? Those remaining sectors are still relying on fuels and gases, and those are our transportation, as well as heating and cooling and industries. And so these sectors need to be decarbonized, and we need to do this very urgently. So this is why we believe that we have a solution, the AM electrolyzer, which can replace hydrogen in those fuel-intensive sectors. So we believe that by having a standardized product, we can drive down the cost of green hydrogen, which is what was holding back its mass deployment. And by making an easy to install product, then we can enable even more creative applications of green hydrogen. And we're always quite amazed by the new use cases that are popping up in regards to green hydrogen. If we just take a couple of examples, for example, we have our partners are using our electrolyzers for on-site generation of green hydrogen and to refuel a plane, a car, a drone, for example. And in Australia, they're also, one of our partners is using solar power to power our electrolyzer, generating green hydrogen, and pairs it with direct air capture technology, which captures CO2, combines it with the H2 that we produce, and then creates green methane, which is a synthetic fuel that can also be used for transportation. And as we're talking about stories, well, our story begins in Chiang Mai with my co-founders Sebastian Justus-Schmidt and Jan Justus-Schmidt wanting to live self-sufficiently. And we're looking for a long-term energy storage solution that used no fossil fuels. So we can see already a wide range of applications for green hydrogen. And it's really painting the picture of our vision, right? To live in a world where fossil fuels are no longer used. But unfortunately, this just can't happen out of idealism. And so we need to drive down the cost of green hydrogen. And that's our vision and our mission.
That's wonderful. Do you think being a Pacific Islander inspired you to enter this field in any way? Is there any connection there? I just wondered what turned on this fire in you to do something this big?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was always really connected to our environment since I was a young girl. So I think coming from the islands, my family is part of those most vulnerable to climate change and to the rise of sea levels. So of course, I have this burning envy and passion to propel the energy transition, to get away from fossil fuels. And I was fortunate enough to meet my co-founders who were already involved in green hydrogen. I was absolutely inspired. I was like, what? You have an alternative fuel just out of sun and water? This is absolutely mind-blowing. The world needs to know about it. And I just couldn't help but get involved.
You know, our live audience here will understand completely how important hydrogen is, molecules versus atoms. But people watching this who are generally interested in the climate, but not in the energy field, people who watch this later may not know how important it is to have something that can store energy, which is why we need hydrogen. So that is a kind of missing link there that makes your project, I think, really, really important. Thank you, Vaitea. Clay Koplin, CEO of Cordova Electric Cooperative and mayor of Cordova, Alaska, and also on the advisory committee to U.S. Department of Energy and the Office of Electricity. Now, what Clay did was develop an advanced microgrid system with underground distribution lines, LED lighting, renewable power generation. I would say you have one plugged in city here, Clay, but tell us a little more about this project.
Well, thank you, Betty Sue. And who knew our industry would get so exciting? I actually got into the energy industry so I could kind of get done with work at the end of the day and go out and grab a salmon and a salmon rod and catch a fish and call it good. But we find ourselves in exciting times. And Cordova is such an amazing place to live and work, the sense of community, the beautiful sweeping mountains and glaciers, but it's also a very challenging environment. Very remote community. We're not connected by road systems or power lines to other communities. So even though we had central power systems and were 100% renewable in 1907 when we started our energy grid, we eventually converted to 100% diesel and fossil fuel power because it was less expensive and portable. But then we found ourselves working to transition back. As the host of the highest quality salmon in the world, our Copper River salmon, and an economy that depends on clean watersheds and a clean environment and a strong social equation for the people that have lived here for thousands of years and the relative newcomers. It's very important for us to be respectful of our environment and to work sustainably so that the beautiful environment around us remains intact. So initially, when I started here as a young engineer almost 25 years ago now, the goal was just to keep the lights on. And the challenge in our high wind environments, our high moisture rainforest, was to try to build a reliable system. So we converted to 100% underground power lines. We developed what we call run-of-the-river hydroelectric projects. You mentioned, Betty, how important storage is to a grid. And right now we are spilling almost 2 megawatts of excess hydroelectricity because we don't have a reservoir to store it in. So I would love Vaitea to convert some of that to hydrogen and use it tomorrow or during the winter when we have to are forced to switch to diesel. But really our progression is to try to get completely off of diesel. So short of developing a next large storage project, which has its own challenges, both technical and financial and social, we need to do the best with what we have. So we've been able to partner fiercely. As a small organization with only 15 employees, we have to have very strong partners. So whether that's U.S. Department of Energy or world-class technology vendors like Hitachi and Saft to help us build a battery energy storage system, that has been our latest step in our progression, as you mentioned, Betty Sue, where it's not an event. This is a hard transition. There's lots of barriers. It takes a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of patience, sheer force of will, and as I said, a lot of strong partners. So we were able to develop a battery energy storage system and use it to actually manage our whole grid, to keep it balanced, and we no longer need to use our hydroelectric capacity to do that. So we're now saving 55 to 65,000 gallons of diesel fuel by leveraging a battery energy storage system to maintain our system stability so that we can liberate our full hydro capacity. So just one of many steps from converting to 100% LED street lighting to deploying huge conservation and efficiency programs to developing run-of-the-river hydroelectric projects. And then as we look to the future to solar and hydro storage to complete that progression, we also look at the ways that we can help our customers again, manage not only the cost of energy, but stop heating their own homes with fossil fuels. That's our primary source of home and business heat. We can now use beneficial electrification and new air source, ground source heat technologies to heat efficiently with electricity. We have a small road system where everybody lives within 7 miles of our town center. So with gasoline at $4.50 a gallon, not only is it cleaner and more responsible and funner to drive electric cars, but it's also more affordable. So the social equation is very important. And by making these good energy investments over the last 20 and 30 years, when we really started this progression, providing our seafood industry with renewable and affordable energy, which brought the seafood onshore, that's built a strong economy and has resulted in the safest community in the state of Alaska, ranked one of the best communities for young families to live. We've done much better at tackling some of the social problems, ranging from drug abuse to mental health, and it's amazing and a great story to share that at the end of the day, the social equation is the one that's important, and when we can use energy to help tip that balance, that's really important. So thank you.
I think that's the heart of humanizing energy. It's not just about the energy, it's about what the energy allows humans to do. And I'm very inspired by your community, and you speak like a mayor. Maybe people will move there after they hear you. You might have an influx here. But I wanted to ask, do you think this is doable, achievable, possible for larger communities to do what you've done?
Absolutely. This is within our reach technically. It's within our reach in some cases financially. But again, the social equation is challenging. There are a lot of misunderstanding, as Mark alluded to. First of all, it's not easy. It's finding the sites to develop renewable energy projects, getting widespread support and community adoption. What I say is the hard skills are often the soft skills. Having that conversation, being respectful, educating your community, and first and foremost, making sure that you understand the needs and concerns of your stakeholders so that you can get broad-based buy-in.
Yeah, I noticed that word you use, fierce partnerships. That really stuck in my mind, fierce partnerships. And I think that has to do with this persistence that's required to make these changes. I also noticed that you have these free charging stations in your town. Imagine if everyone could charge their vehicles for free, how quick the electric vehicles would be. I think that's just brilliant. So thank you. Faith, Chege, portfolio coordinator of something called Energy and Environment Partnerships Trust Fund, which is a clean energy financing facility hosted and managed by the Nordic Development Fund. And it gets its funding from Austria and Finland. So this is truly an international project. And what you do, as I understand it, is to provide these early stage grants, really hard to come by, which finances innovation in clean energy. Could you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, thanks, Betty. Yes, so I'm with EEP Africa, and as you made in the introduction, we provide grant funding to early stage companies, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa. So we're looking at the southern and the eastern Africa regions. And in the last 10 years, we've deployed about $100 million in grant funding to over 250 projects that are developing solar lighting, hydropower, electric mobility, productive use energy solutions, among others. And we tend to come in really early with our high-risk capital. And often this is the first in capital in the company, and we're able to support pilots of new technologies, test new markets that would otherwise be too risky to test with equity funding. And then we catalyze follow-on funding for these companies. And in the last 10 years, we've seen our portfolio companies go on to have a great impact in the region, with projected impact of these companies reaching 5 million people in the continent, creating over 8,000 direct jobs, and reducing CO2 emissions by about 1.5 million tons. So it's been a great 10 years of really looking at the different nodes of the value chain and seeing where we can make a difference and move the energy sector forward. And one of the companies that is doing really great and championing this energy transition in our portfolio is Jazza Energy, that is based in Tanzania and is part of the field portfolio that Mark, we are celebrating today for the BBC work. And what Jazza is doing is they're providing electricity to low-income households in rural Tanzania through a network of solar energy hubs and rechargeable batteries. So how this works is the customers will come, lease a battery pack at an affordable fee that is normally cheaper than kerosene, and then they will charge their phones. It can power up to 4 lights. They will charge a TV. They will charge a radio. And we have about 16% of these customers actually using these batteries for productive use of energy, which means they're able to generate revenue. One customer is actually using this to power a barbershop and has really seen his life impacted just in terms of increased income, as well as just access to more customers and a more reliable source of energy. So to date, Jazza has set up 78 hubs in Tanzania, and all of them are actually operated by women who are between the age of 18 and 25, which is amazing to see renewable energy really having an impact on, one, creating jobs, but over and above that, the upskilling of young women in rural Africa. And they have so far reached 45,000 people in remote villages who have been able to switch from kerosene to now using clean lighting. And as we see in the renewable energy space, that first step from kerosene to clean energy is where we pack most of the marginal impact for the customer, as their livelihoods have been changed. They also are experiencing savings in terms of just the cost of kerosene is definitely more than the cost of this battery swap. So up to 20% of their annual revenue is now saved, and they can actually apply that to other income generating activities and the betterment of their homes. We're also seeing a tremendous shift in these customers now being able to learn how to use energy. And what happens is once they've now begun to use a solar lamp, for example, then from there, they're able to graduate up the energy ladder, and you see them begin to have a demand for refrigerators. They now are demanding for more appliances like milling machines, which at the end of the day really does end up changing a community and making a great impact economically, but also socially. Just a bit about myself, since it is about humanizing energy. So I've been in the renewable energy space for about 10 years. Prior to my role at EEP, I worked in the venture capital space. I've been a CFO of a solar home system company, but most interestingly, I actually used I used a kerosene lamp to study as a little girl because I grew up in rural Kenya. So I have firsthand experienced the benefits of clean energy. And as Jazza is making a difference in Tanzania, I've been able to experience that change from using a kerosene lamp to study to actually using solar lighting. And thankfully, Kenya now has about 80% electrification. So really moving up that energy ladder and being able to really experience firsthand the benefits of renewable energy in the betterment of the quality of life.
You know, a lot of the energy models that I've looked at assume that as people move up the energy ladder, we will have more global warming, we'll have more climate change but people like you are intervening in the system to make a better life with a healthier planet at the beginning. So I'm just, since you look for these innovations early on in the space, I'm just wondering, what do you look for in potential candidates for funding? Is it the ability to affect a lot of people? Is it, what is it you're looking for when you fund these people?
Yeah, so we look at a few things. So number one is definitely the country in which they're operating and the relevance of that technology. So a good example of this would be, for example, in Kenya right now, we would not be investing in solar home systems because the sector has really grown. So we really want to come in really early. So at the moment, for example, we're investing a lot in mobility companies and really championing that e-mobility space. So definitely the stage of the sector in the country. For the particular company, we're looking at the business model, and we want to make sure that there is a product market fit. So we're speaking to the customers to make sure that we understand exactly what they need and make sure that these companies are providing, or the innovations they're coming up with are actually able to address the challenges they have. We also we look at the team, because they say it takes a good team to take a great idea and really have it make an impact and make a difference. And also we really, as you've seen, we're really funded by government. So we're looking for impact. We want to see how much CO2 emissions are you reducing or avoiding? How many people are you employing? We have a requirement that at least a good percentage of that goes to creating jobs for women. And the next thing we look for is scalability. Is this idea, after we have given you that 500,000 euro grant, will you be able to raise subsequent funding of 1 million, 2 million, and really be able to grow a company that makes a difference on the continent and beyond?
You know, what you're saying reminds me how important humanizing energy is, because you start with the customer and you also start with the people who are doing it and have a vision for the future. So it starts with the people. So I find that's just really, really remarkable. Negar Soufi, Senior Vice President of Infineon in Austria. Could you talk to us about what you're up to in this space?
Yes, Betty, thank you so much. So yes, as you mentioned, I work for Infineon Technology, which is the market leader in power semiconductor sector. I have the global business responsibility for electronic power switches that might not be tangible for everyone. I'll explain it a little bit. In fact, these products are used almost everywhere in our daily lives, in our home appliances, in our computers, our cars, and many more. Infineon products make life easier, safer, and greener. I'll tell you in a second how, but before that, I'd like to touch briefly on humanizing energy, because I found it very, it moved me emotionally a lot. In this context, in the context of energy for better lives, my desire is to improve the quality of life for the current and the future generations. That includes different aspects, such as education, access to technology, or access to a clean and affordable energy. We must expand, in fact, the high standard of life, which has been achieved in the industrialized countries across the globe. In the same context, and it has been mentioned a few times, and Betty, by you as well, one of the most serious challenges of our time is climate change. If Mother Nature loses its balance, our lives, no matter where we live and what we do, will be directly impacted. So the question why it is important to tell stories about energy sector is the answer is very simple. If we want to make life better across the world, it requires more energy, which must become accessible and affordable. At the same time, we face the challenge of climate change. So it gets worse if the energy, which is the demand to energy, which is getting more, if that energy is not clean. 2/3 of today's greenhouse gas emissions are produced from energy sector. 1/3 of the world's energy requirement is consumed as electricity. So optimizing energy efficiency and energy saving is key to decelerate the trend of climate change and preserve the planet. So the question why it is important to capture human stories, I believe we have been relying too much on politics to fix the climate change. While we need their support, at the end, the people make the change. We must make preserving the planet to everybody's topic, to mobilize individuals to take ownership and do something. To achieve that, though, communication is key. We have to communicate in a relevant and tailor-made for people. That is there where the human stories matter. It must be personal. And the last thing, why now? I personally believe if we take action now, we still can decelerate the trend with minimal sacrifices. The point of no return is getting closer, so it's time for action. In some sectors, such as semiconductor, where I come from, we have the privilege to directly impact the situation with innovation and technology advancements. How do we do that? Semiconductor materials such as silicon or gallium nitride have the characteristic to let the energy pass through or block it. These products can also be designed in a way to control the energy conversion in the most efficient way. So they are essential part of, as I mentioned before, our everyday's life, from energy generation, such as solar, or transmission and consumption. In power conversion, you need to make sure the energy which goes in comes out. Very simple. You must minimize the energy losses. And to enable that, it is super essential that the energy can flow through the product. In this case, I'm talking about for example, a semiconductor product, such as power switches. Energy has to be able to go through the shortest path, which makes it quite challenging. Infineon is able to make chips which are very thin, a quarter of human hair thin, and therefore they are almost loss-free. If I try to give you a real life example, as I know semiconductor industry is not very tangible, first of all, I'd like to mention in all of those nice things which other panelists mentioned, semiconductor products are used. Another example of real life, nowadays we continuously are online. We are downloading data, streaming, exchanging videos. All this requires data processing. And that happens mostly in cloud servers. Many data centers around the globe containing a lot of servers do this job, data processing. You must imagine these are big buildings, big rooms full of server racks. In each of them, power semiconductor products are used, and they deliver energy to the processor, data processor. Here comes now how a semiconductor products can make the difference. The less heat these products produce, in other words, the more energy efficient they are, the lower cooling is required. The lower cooling, the less energy consumption. So we save energy. At the same time, we decelerate the trend of climate change, and we contribute to preserve our planet. So there are many more examples. I can talk about it many hours, but I think I don't have that time.
Thank you, Negar. One of the things you said, which I think would be an interesting way to start this conversation is amongst us, is that we depend on government politics too much, that we have, and we need to go into the humanizing part of it. And I'm curious to take this back to Clay, who's both in government and also the CEO of an energy company, which is very handy, it seems to me, for that particular relationship. What would you say about the role of government in this humanizing energy? Because after all, government is us in most cases.
It is, and I think there's a perception that policy can bring solutions, and we're in an interesting landscape where you can argue whether policy has ever really moved at the speed of business, but we've had a sea change now where technologies, thank goodness, like the ones in Negar is mentioning, those technologies are developing faster than the speed of business even. Business is scrambling to keep up with technological change, so it's very hard for policies to get out in front of new technologies and opportunities and decide how and where they should be used. Really, that's something maybe best left to the industries and the users. Where the government and policymakers can really help is in partnering. They can, again, it's having that conversation, understanding what the needs are, and helping on on the terms of stakeholders, and maybe not just that let's push a solution out. As a utility manager, I can say we've done way too much of that. We've tried to be the solution for our customers. That's not the world we live in. We need to understand the customers, their needs, and work to meet them and provide them what they're looking for.
Others of you, what questions do you have of each other? I have lots of questions, so let me back off and say, as you were listening to each other, what sort of things did you want to hear more about, or that you have questions about? Anybody, leap in here in this Zoom space. I'll just go down my list because I've got lots of questions. Faith, I'm very interested in whether you think other continents can learn what you've done on your continent. Not just other countries, but other continents. I just wonder what we can learn from what you've done.
Yeah, that's a good question. So definitely sub-Saharan Africa, one of the main trends has been that our population is growing much faster than access to energy has been possible. And as a result of that, we really had to leapfrog a lot of the development journey that the rest of the world has gone through. And as a result of the leapfrogging and the innovation, then we're finding that most of our countries actually are generating at the moment more energy than we're able to transmit. And a lot of that energy mix is a large proportion of that energy mix is actually renewable energy. And therefore, there is just such an amazing movement going on in terms of we're seeing more funding definitely going towards renewable energy than it is to coal. So while the developing countries are making the transition from the coal and other non-clean energy, for us, we really don't have an option. It just makes economic sense at the moment for us to just go green the whole way. And definitely, the other one is in just understanding our customers. I think one of the things that's come out really strongly during this COVID season is that because a large customer base that we have is living on less than $2 a day, and we have to make sure that there is access to energy, especially during COVID, because children are not going to school for the larger part of the time. They're home. They need to be able to continue studying. People have less income, so you have to get innovative around just making sure that they have lights on and they have their phones to get to know, is there a lockdown, what's going on. As a result of that, we have a better relationship with our customers, which I believe in the long run will then mean that our utilities can perform even much better, which is, as we are saying, at the end of the day, it only makes business sense to know your customers well enough to be able to innovate for them. And other countries can definitely, and continents can definitely learn from those two things that I believe sub-Saharan Africa is doing well at the moment, but has been as a result of just having to leapfrog and getting a little bit too late in the game, but really is working for good as a continent at the moment.
I think that leapfrogging idea is just so important. We have a lot to learn from people that we have traditionally thought we were teaching. I say we, coming from another continent, and it's that's a human thing. That is the need for humans to open up in different ways, not just for technology to be developed. So I think that I think there's just a lot to learn from each other and not have to reinvent the wheel, and which is why I'm so glad the BBC is focusing on these individual stories. As we come near to the end of our time, we do have a little time left. What is it you want to say that you haven't said, recognizing that the people here in this room listening to this, I say this room, this Zoom universe, who are listening to this, are very knowledgeable about energy. Most of them are in the energy field. What is it that those of us in the energy field, those of us in this room, tend to miss? What do we miss?
I would just like to follow on Betty Sue from Faith's comments, because in many ways there's an ironic similarity between very remote rural Alaska in really what I would call developing world conditions and situations where the cost of fossil fuels creates a term that we use, energy poverty, where they're using a fourth to a half of their disposable income to meet their energy needs. And so we've also seen in the very remote areas of new technologies have become available, and this has happened here in Cordova. We're able to leap 3 or 4 generations of technology, kind of middle ground technology, and it's like foot racing when you suddenly look around and realize there's nobody else around you because you're out in front. And to kind of, as I mentioned, it looks like a transition to a lot of people outside the industry. For me, having been in it, it's more of a progression, and we've suddenly found ourselves out front. And it's good to know that the innovation, much of the real transformational innovation, is happening in Africa, in remote microgrids, in places where there are such fierce challenges just to keep the lights on anyway. They've had to work with very limited resources to accomplish very challenging headwinds. And so that's why we've been able as Cordova Electric to work with the Department of Energy. We made a change from a utility in a community that needs assistance to one that is sharing those stories and those lessons learned in those transformational, I call it innovation at the low end. And that's how you can have a community of 2,300 people, where one of my neighbors 10 houses down the street was born and raised in this community of 2,300 people and developed the leading wave energy technology in the United States, 5 times the energy output per unit cost. And that's because when you have a young man who's grown up on the ocean, fixing boats, welding, working with their hands, trade skills, they're doers. And so very important to recognize the innovation on the low end and out on the grid edges.
Yes, so big companies and government departments of energy can learn a lot from the people side of things, and the small places, the small people. It's I think this is the part that that maybe our audience, I would like to say, listen up. These stories are really important and have major implications going forward. Which reminds me, Vaitea, I'm thinking of hydrogen. There's a lot of interest in hydrogen. When you talk to people, you say, oh, but that's decades off. Give us some hope that it's nearer than decades off.
Oh, it is absolutely much closer than decades away. I have to tell you, we just hosted the ceremony for the groundbreaking of the mass production of our Enapter campus, the mass production of our electrolyzers in the Enapter campus. And this is to not make it so many decades away, but actually to happen in the next 2 to 3 years. So climate change is an urgent topic, right? We need to address it right now, and we're scaling as quickly as possible to drive down the cost and to make this a reality. For this generation and also for the next generations, and for the remote communities also to leapfrog, as we've been talking about, into clean energy. And something that we haven't discussed is this trend towards decentralization. And this is where green hydrogen can really play a role in providing not only long-term energy storage, but also enabling new business models with a modular product that is cost-effective and really go more into democratizing energy access.
Now, there's an interesting note to end on: democratizing energy access. I was thinking that I sat next to a stranger at a banquet recently who runs his automobiles on hydrogen from the runoff of his roof. He just electrolyzes it. And so I thought, well, gosh, is that the future? That's interesting. And then on the other hand, with Negar, the technology where efficiency is pushed with the chips. To me, this addresses this really addresses the big aspect stories, the difficulty that bigness poses, the difficulty that the badness poses, and the difficulty that the ugly poses. You humans here on this Zoom screen inspire us all. So I want to thank you, and I want to thank the BBC and Mark for doing this wonderful project, and urge all of you in the audience to look at these films, because they are inspiring, and the stars of these films are right here on the screen. We've been really lucky to have you. Thank you all. Hello, welcome. We have the panel here live to accept your questions. So I hope you'll utilize the chat, which I understand on your screen is on the bottom right. Please feed your questions in, which will then be fed to me and then to the panel here, which are here live with you. So I want to start, while we're collecting questions, by asking Mark a little bit about the production. I want to ask him, what's been the most fun? What do you hope for? What are your dreams for these films and for Humanizing Energy, Mark?
What's been the most fun? Well, I think if you go on the Humanising Energy site, hosted by the World Energy Council today, you can access bbc.com tomorrow, you'll see a map of the world, and you'll see just the sheer breadth of filming locations. I think that is the most exciting. You know, from the very initial stages, we had story submissions coming in from California, Australia, Mongolia, Tanzania, and delighted to say that we've been able to film right the way across the globe. Of course, that comes with challenges. During COVID, it wasn't easy, but we were able to pull it all off. So you'll also see actually in a lot of the shoots that there's sort of no holds bars when it comes to the cinematography, you know, really dramatic shots over mountain ranges. But yeah, I'd have to go and watch it for yourself and take a look. One of the films actually, Mabanaft, which was focused on liquid e-fuels, is a little bit exciting, a little bit dramatic, which is not expected at all, but incredibly exciting stuff. So yeah, have a look, and yeah, you'll see it for yourself.
Oh, thank you. I'm really looking forward. Having seen the films of our stars here on this screen, which are so good, they're so just brilliantly produced, I think. I'm really looking forward to seeing some of the others, and which I hope everyone in the audience will do, advertising them, maybe that's the word, to all of our social networks, because I think the whole world needs to know about these hopeful stories about energy in the future, because we are up against it, and time is short, and there is realistic hope. Speaking of communication, we have here Omar Zafrani from the World Energy Council. He's the chairman of Strategy and Communications Committee for that council. And Omar, I would like you to talk a little bit more about humanizing energy and what we all can do to help that.
Thank you, Betty Sue. It's a real pleasure to be joining the session, to actually hear a little bit more about everybody's stories kind of from behind the lens. So let me begin by providing some context. I think we can all agree that there have been positive steps taken by companies, by governments to enable the energy transition, whether it's technology development, policies, or investment, yet to a certain extent, it's still being viewed quite simplistically. Now, there's no silver bullet or one-size-fits-all scenario to addressing the energy transition, and it's going to vary from region, from market, and from community. And that's why a customer or community-focused solution, similar to what we heard, for example, from Clay or from Faith, are really crucial to addressing the energy transition. But more importantly, not much is being done to engage society in the energy transition. What does the energy transition mean for regional energy security? What does it mean for communities that rely on coal, oil, and gas for jobs? And what does it mean for communities that merely require basic needs, such as access to energy or water? So the question we ask ourselves is, what is being done to enable and prepare society and communities for the energy transition? And as you know, the World Energy Council does not advocate for a specific technology. Instead, we are focused on building bridges between the diverse energy needs of different regions, of societies, and communities. So essentially, our Humanizing Energy vision aims to champion a more active and inclusive, people and society-centric energy agenda. And this is where our partnership with the BBC plays a crucial role. It's helping tell the story of how societies and communities can prepare for the energy transition. And storytelling, in my opinion, is the holy grail to galvanize social action and to truly deliver real results from an energy transition point of view.
You know, Clay, when Omar was talking about people and engaging with people, I thought, who engages with people more than a mayor of a town? But I want to ask, since you've had this this job of directly engaging with the public, what was the hardest part of that? What challenges did you face that maybe all of us, if we start engaging with the public, would come across?
You know, unfortunately, I have the handicap of an engineer. It's hard sometimes to communicate in technical terms. If we're honest, even electrical engineers don't fully understand electricity and how it works. It's a odorless, colorless, light speed commodity, and it's hard to explain. So I think you really do have to humanize it and make some kind of physical connection with daily life. And sometimes there's some misconceptions. I know when we installed free electric vehicle charging stations, there were some in the community who were actually a little disappointed. They said, why are you giving away free electricity when people have to pay for it? Well, it turns out it's very expensive to have highly networked electric meters to charge people, and they don't hold up well in our wet climate. So it's actually less expensive for us to give the electricity away than to try to sell it. So it's hard sometimes to explain the reasons for what you do, but we really wanted to create opportunities for our customers. And so by installing things like free electric vehicle charging stations, buying an electric car, purchasing it and loaning it to our customers so they could drive one and see if maybe it's something they would like to have, and then just constant communication. For example, I assumed that every business would love to have a free electric vehicle charging station in front of their front doors, but it turns out that parking is already a problem in our small community streets. So they didn't want cars parked there for hours charging electrically. So by having free chargers close to the business district but not in it, we actually help solve a parking problem in addition to an energy problem. So it really boils down to communicating on a case-by-case basis, and it does take constant communication to try to explain the what and why, and show the opportunities that we have with renewable energy and the cost effectiveness and other benefits.
Yeah, there's something about humans that are case-by-case basis. So when we talk about humanizing energy, I think what makes it seem so difficult is that you can't just have a one-size-fits-all overall solution that you impose. Every place is different. And, I was thinking of Faith and working with people who are already in community, perhaps without electricity or any kind of energy. And how then do you work with the possible threat to the way things have always been? Faith, do you run across resistance just to change itself?
Yeah, behavior change is definitely one of the biggest barriers to adoption of innovation. And there's a lot of education that has to take place for these customers to really connect to the value proposition that you see as an innovator, be it a company, be it an entrepreneur really trying to solve a problem. But what you find is with a lot of these customers, what ends up happening is once you understand the problem from their end, and then you begin to innovate and communicate what it is that you're trying to build and the value proposition in a language that they get, then they begin to embrace it. And the behavior change becomes less, which is where you find them actually having having the willpower and being willing to actually buy the product. And I'll just give an example of that. It would be, we'll find customers on the ground saying, the only reason I want to buy a solar TV is because it will save my marriage, which is not a value proposition you think about when innovating a solar TV in China, And you ask, how is that? And they say, because my husband no longer goes to the pub to have alcohol. Instead, he can spend more time with the kids and spend more time at home. Then you go like, okay, then that's our value proposition. We will make televisions, and then we will have a value proposition of saving marriages in rural Africa. And it works, but it has to be two-way communication. And once you embrace and see things from the side of the customer, then you're able to get them to actually buy the product, and then there's benefit on both ends.
Yeah, I never thought of television as as a way of saving America. It makes sense. It makes sense. Now that is a humanizing energy story for sure. Vaitea, people are very excited about hydrogen these days. I don't know about electrolysis saving a marriage, but if I were to come to you and say, I've heard about this thing, I don't know anything about it, what could you show me? I mean, actually visually show me that would help me understand what the heck you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were to ask me, how does it work? What does it look like? If you're just asking about our technology, I'd tell you, well, imagine a microwave. That's about the size of a microwave today. That's the device that we're building today. So at least that's the size of today. And then, maybe you'll remember an experiment from school where you had a cup of water and a battery and a plus and a minus, and you might have remembered the bubbles fizzing. On one side, it was the hydrogen with more bubbles, this is 2H, and then on the other side, it was the oxygen bubbling. And so at least here we would step into the first, okay, how does electrolysis work, and splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen from a chemistry perspective. But then if we were to imagine, okay, but how does it work in practice? How does it work in real life? Then you could already imagine it by connecting it to your senses, right? Because I feel as humans, we are sensorial beings. We think about what smells, what do things sound like, what do they feel like? And if we were just to picture, for example, a city running on hydrogen, we would think, oh, wow, it's extremely quiet, actually, and the air is much more pure. If taxi cars, for example, are driving on hydrogen, well, they're only emitting water, so it doesn't sound, there's no noise pollution, there's also no air pollution, and that's just touching upon the mobility aspect of using hydrogen.
Not only does one size not fit all, but one solution doesn't fit all, because I can see hydrogen working very well in some places, but then what happens to Clay's free electricity up there in Alaska? It may not, I think this collage, this mosaic of solutions, we have to start thinking in retail terms, and that too is closer to the human. In the past, the whole issue of energy, we thought immediately of oil and gas companies and big outfits. Now, even the big outfits have to think in smaller, more direct terms. And I just wonder, Mark, in your productions, what are you doing about the many of whom who are here in this audience? What stories do we tell not only to, but with the big energy companies?
Well, yeah, I think that was one of the main difficulties we faced in the initial stages, ensuring that we could represent as broad a range of the energy mix as possible, and critically to show people in their individual contexts, in totally different professions, totally different industries. We had the example of the farmer just outside of Turin who's running his tractors on biofuels. But of course, that's totally different from the school in South Africa, run by solar panels, funded by crowdfunding from all across the globe. So whilst it was important for us, of course, in Humanising Energy to find the characters at the centerpiece, we had to ensure that these characters were in different industries, in different regional contexts, and then there were different energy solutions meeting their needs. So yeah, that was one of the main challenges we faced, and it is a mosaic. I like that term.
We have a question from the audience also directed to you, Mark, and it goes like this. When bringing together these stories, was there a common thread or essence that you found despite being across continents and sectors and communities? What was the common thread?
That's a really, really interesting question. I think resilience and people's adaptability, depending on their context, was a common thread wherever we went. Of course, there's a real diversity in stories, but seeing how people work to solve a particular challenge was inspiring, and we saw that right the way across the globe. The characters, I think generally the style that we pursue is very solutions focused. We want to show our audiences how challenges can be overcome, and so the documentary style films slightly lend themselves to that. But I would say that was the one common thread, that resilience and adaptability. of communities and of industries as well. And also just one other point, the pace of change is just astonishing. You know, I remember the first time I spoke to Vaitea, for example, couldn't believe it, you know, where we're at and where we're potentially going to get to in the coming years. And so I'd say that as well, you know, incredible pace of change to the extent where when we initiated, you know, some of these stories to now, there's been incredible progress made, even in that short amount of time, even in that 6 month period. So I'd say that's another common thread, and a very inspiring one as well.
You know what? You may have to do a sequel. You may have to go back to all these places you've been to and see what's developed in the last 6 months. Your films will need updates, which is exciting. Can people, I just wonder, this is a kind of closing thought. Can people in the audience visit these places, a lot of them? Is it possible if we wanted, say, to go to Alaska and visit Clay, would we be welcome there to look at what he's up to there?
Clay, I'm going to leave that to you. I certainly hope so.
Well, we do have a daily jet service, and then we have a state ferry that you can come on. I suppose we've, believe it or not, had people walk. It took several weeks and a lot of swimming and portable rafts, but I would recommend commercial travel. And yes, we are accessible.
Because I think if we meet human to human and actually talk to each other, hope can spring up there too. So I'm really excited about humanizing energy. I think that's the way forward because it inspires young people and everybody on the planet. So thanks to the BBC, thanks to the World Energy Council, thanks to everybody involved in this.
Betty Sue, thank you so much for a fantastic end of day session. I had lots of thoughts about how to summarize the day and the learnings. I'm going to throw them all away because I think the key word for me that came out of the last session was how refreshing that was to listen to the stories. And, you know, to your point, how important it is to make sure that we provide a platform for those stories. And as Mark said at the end, you know, what were the common threads that that were through all of the different stories? You know, resilience and adaptability, how people work to solve, and the pace of change. And I think, you know, actually those words and those headlines can be taken back through all of the sessions that we've heard about today. And I think what was really nice about the final session is that when we think about the energy system, when we think about energy transition and transformation, sometimes it can be a little bit daunting. I mean, if you just think the previous session on electrification in the US or in the Americas, the numbers involved and the complexity of change can be a little bit debilitating. It can kind of create an inertia surrounding the degree of change that we need to go through. And yet when we listen to those stories of individuals in often positions of adversity, you know, we've got the similarity of Cordova and in sub-Saharan Africa of small communities thinking differently about how they're going to think about their energy challenge and to resolve that. And, you know, key to an awful lot of that was communication. So yes, today we've heard about some of the global challenges and the issues that we need to take. We've heard about the circular carbon economy. We've heard about basically the rise of the machines and the consumer, data, digitalization. We've heard about Central Asia in the context of all the collaboration that's going on in that part of the world. And we've heard about, you know, the certainty of uncertainty when we started today. But at the end of the day, I really felt those stories highlighted what we need to embrace and what we need to think about as the World Energy Council and as participants in that, as we think about our agenda of humanizing energy. And, you know, words that came out that I really liked were fierce partnerships that were talked about in Cordova. And again, we've heard about that all during the day. We can't solve on our own. We have to collaborate. But fierce partnerships will remain in my mind for a long time in terms of what we need to do as we think about change in our energy system over the next 10 years. And then also democratizing energy access. You know, we're not going to be moving towards humanizing energy and moving towards our ambition unless we democratize energy access and solve for communities as we go forward. So thanks to everyone who has helped put the first day together. An awful lot of work has happened behind the camera, so to speak. So my thanks to everyone at the World Energy Council for putting on a fantastic day one. Really interesting topics, and what a fantastic way to end the day, a very energizing way, refreshing, as I said, in terms of how it has, I think, motivated all of us to think about energy systems differently and recognize that we all can make a difference. We look forward to welcoming you back tomorrow on day two. We start at 6:30 a.m. tomorrow. Well, some of you start at 6:30 a.m. tomorrow as we take on a regional perspective from Asia and Asia Pacific on future fuels. And I look forward to rejoining you later on in the day. Once again, thank you to all for participating. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you to the council members that have put this on.